What's up, my wizards? Dev from SBMTG down there, here with another deck tech today, and if the comment section is anything to be believed, a pretty highly anticipated one. This is green-black Delirium, and we can do it on a budget for less than $100, really something like $75 on TCG Player. Not a bad price. The key to playing Delirium is playing enough cards that dump stuff into your graveyard while also playing a bunch of different card types. I think after about 3 weeks of brewing here, hey, we finally struck a pretty good balance between these concepts, and here's what we've come up with. We'll start with the creatures first, as usual. There's 12 creatures in this deck, and we'll start with the creature that I think is like the most important dude in the deck. 4 copies, whole play set of Mindrack Demon here. 4 mana for a 4 power flying trample dude is amazing, and 5 toughness is incredible in this format. He can't be Grasp of Darkness, he can't be killed by Languish, including our own Languish. And this guy's good either before or after a Languish. You know, Languish 4th turn, follow it up next turn with this guy, or play this guy 4th turn, then follow it up next turn with a Languish. He'll be the only guy left on the board a lot of the time. But the really cool thing here, obviously, is that he fuels Delirium while being awesome. You know what I mean? And there is the possibility that he'll hurt us, but a lot of times he won't. You know, we've got a lot of stuff earlier on in the game to sort of help us dump stuff in their graveyard to where this guy won't be as much of a pain in the butt. That in mind, it is important to remember that this guy can't possibly hurt you until the upkeep after he comes into play. You get a whole turn to block with him, that's the thing. And the next turn you can put this trigger on the stack and then say pop a Vessel of Nascency or something. That'll bump cards into your graveyard, and hopefully with the cards that he dumped into your graveyard, that'll make Delirium you won't have to take any damage. Tech aside, this guy's just really good stats and is perfect for what we're trying to do. Really good in the format right now, can block a lot of things and attack into a lot of things, and is resistant to a lot of the removal we see being played out of black. So, love this dude kind of an awful lot. We're going to play all the copies of him. We're just going to play a one of the Gitrog monster here. We don't need to play a bunch of these. I started out with 2, but with the stuff we've got in the deck, I really don't think we need to play a bunch of copies of him. We can search him up with Traverse the Evenwald. We can get him with Gather the Pack. We can get him with Vessel of Nascency. Just a lot of stuff that we can do to get this dude, and we only need really the 1 copy. If we dump him into our graveyard, we can get him back with Pulse of Murasa. We're playing that too. So I just don't see any reason to play a ton of this dude. You know, you get him into play, and he does his job pretty well. He's a huge body that can attack for the win or just sit back and clog up the ground like forever. and just let Mindrack Demon go through the air. Of course, he's a good attacker too, and card advantage that dumps lands into our graveyard to fuel Delirium. All of this is good. We're playing 4 copies of Deathcap Cultivator in the deck. Actually, super good guy. Can get us to Mindrack Demon on turn 3, or can get us to Gitrog Monster on turn 4. Both of those are possibilities. Just mana ramp is fine, and when he does get Delirium, he again clogs up the ground in the same way that Gitrog Monster can, you know. We can usually trade this and fuel Delirium by a creature, which is sometimes harder than it looks in this deck. 12 creatures isn't all the creatures or anything, and it can be tough without just, you know, milling them into the graveyard. To get them into the graveyard if your opponent doesn't want them to go there, you know, but there's a lot of times your opponent will obviously want your dudes to go to the graveyard. But once you have Delirium, Deathcap Cultivator isn't necessarily one of those creatures they want to go to the graveyard, because it usually means trading one of their own creatures. I like the dude because early game, he's good ramp, you know, he can get you to any of your big drops a little faster, and then once he's, you know, performed that function, he switches into a defensive machine that trades for one of their creatures. I've just been really surprised by how good Deathcap Cultivator is. I just want to keep babbling about the card, but it's ramp that does more things for us. You know, it's on theme. Death Touch is great, so yeah, just try this guy. He's actually amazing. And to finish off the creatures, I'm playing 3 copies of Hangerback Walker in the deck, mostly because it's good early game defense. It gets us into the mid game. You know, we want to be in the mid game to the late game in this deck so that we can ensure that we have Delirium. The deck doesn't necessarily get Delirium as fast as possible or anything, but around turn 5, turn 6, you'll usually turn on your Delirium, just all your cards get way better. He counts as an artifact and a creature in the graveyard. He's the only artifact we're playing in the deck, but he is a way to sneak in 3 artifacts on top of a creature. Just love that when he does go to the graveyard, that's him serving his purpose. You know, he basically fuels Delirium by 2 cards, which is great and worth the sort of hit to the budget that we have to take to play the card. I don't really have to explain how good Hangerback Walker is, though. We're going into the enchantments here. We're playing 8 enchantments in the deck. Again, we want to play as many different card types as we can. And 4 of those are Vessel of Nascency. A really good tool here, and you're not going to often go like, first turn this, second turn pop it. You will do that occasionally, and it can set you up. You know, it's really good card selection. It can get you any of the enchantments that you want, any creatures you want, any lands. I mean, sets you up really well, but you're not going to do it second turn all the time. We got a lot of second turn plays in the deck, so he can play it first turn and then sort of wait until 4th, 5th turn to pop it, and then like almost guarantee Delirium at that point in the game. A lot of people just look at Vessel as like a way to fuel Delirium, and they don't really see the most important part of the card, in that it's really cheap, card selection. And it's good card selection in this deck and get us any of the permanents that we're playing. So everything about Vessel has been actually pretty surprisingly good. It feels kind of like an Oath of Nissa, only this deck wants it more than Oath of Nissa because we get to drop a bunch of cards in the graveyard. We're also playing a full 4 of Autumnal Gloom. I cannot tell you how much I've been impressed with this card. This card is really, really good. Sometimes late in the game after we have Delirium, or even like turn 4 or 5, depending on what we've done in the early game. This is just like a 3-mana 4/4 hexproof. You drop it, you pass the turn, and it immediately becomes a 4/4 hexproof, which is pretty awesome. It does die to Languish, but if it does go to the graveyard, then we've got an enchantment in the graveyard now. That's pretty good. If we don't already have a Vessel, that's good for Delirium anyway, This also, obviously, the first side of it fuels Delirium, If you play it, you've got extra mana that turn, go ahead and pump a couple of black mana into it and try and get Delirium before you pass the turn. You'll have a 4/4 hexproof. 4/4 hexproof is really, actually super good. If we can get this turn 3, it's never going to like flip that early or anything once you pass the turn, but the next turn, you can pump any extra mana into making shade, but you're back. You can pump any extra black mana that you have into, trying to fuel your Delirium if you have extra black mana. Another good play before I move on here is to 3rd turn Autumnal Gloom, 4th turn Mind Rack Demon. That could be really good, especially if you went like turn 1 Vessel, turn 2 Pop It, turn 3 Autumnal Gloom, turn 4 Mind Rack, That's just not going to happen every game, but we are running a bunch of copies of all those cards. It has happened more than once. That's a good turn sequence. Because when you play your Mind Rack Demon, you'll almost certainly fuel Delirium in that situation, and then when you pass the turn, you'll have a 4/4 hexproof and a 4/5 flying trample. It doesn't get much more intimidating than that. We're playing 9 total sorceries in the deck here, starting with 2 copies of Traverse the Uvenwald. Once we do have Delirium, this is something else that allows us to play, 1 of Gitrog Monster, 3 of Hangerback Walker. We can find these creatures very, very consistently. It's not that much of a problem, especially with something like Traverse. And in the early game, if we don't have Delirium, it helps us go and get a land to sort of smooth out our land count, if that's what we want to do. But mostly we want to hang on to this and use it as a tutor for an important creature in the later game. We're playing 2 Gather the Pack in the deck, which has been really nice, but with only 12 creatures, I don't want to play a bunch of copies of Gather the Pack or anything. Now, if you don't get a creature off of it, of course, you just get to drop a bunch of cards in the graveyard, which could be good for Delirium, or could be bad depending on what point of the game we're in. But as far as finding a creature early game, it often does, and we can drop a bunch of other cards into our graveyard. Good for Delirium. So I want to play at least a couple of copies of this, and it has been good, but I wouldn't want to push it. As far as other sorceries go, we're playing 2 copies of Duress in the deck, and this slot began life as Read the Bones. It was 2 Read the Bones, but with all the stuff that we use as card selection in the deck, Gitrog Monster also draws cards for us. We've got Vessel of Nascency, that's card selection. We've got Traverse the Uvenwald card selection, Gather the Pack card selection. I just didn't think that, I felt Read the Bones was really redundant and hurt our life total against aggro, which is the deck that we're not very good against, to be honest with you. So I put in Duress, and yeah, that's not great against aggro either. But the most important aggro decks in the format right now, I'll play Collected Company, which Duress can pluck out of their hand. We don't have much defense against Planeswalkers other than To the Slaughter, so Duress can also pluck Planeswalkers out of their hand. I just thought that Duress was really, really good early and even mid-game defense against some of the stuff that we wouldn't otherwise have good defense against. Speaking of controlling aggro, the last 3 sorceries we're playing are 3 copies of Languish. And you could play 4 if your local meta is just overflowing with aggro. But Languish, I feel like, is a must-play card, especially considering our sort of all-star creatures, Mind Rack and Gitrog, don't die to it. So a good way to set up for them, or if we've already got them on the board, we can blow away everything else and swing in. But mostly this is a panic button, a safety valve. If you can survive until turn 4, which normally you can, then just blow the world up and start fresh. We've been doing that since '93. We're playing 7 instants in the deck here, and we're going to start with 3 copies of Grasp of Darkness. Just staple removal in the format. I'm thinking about going 2 Grasp and 1 Ultimate Price. I think that could work too. But Grasp of Darkness is pretty reliable too, and we're playing 18 black sources in the deck. We can get 2 black by turn 2 fairly consistently. Speaking of removal, I'm playing 2 copies of To the Slaughter in the deck. Just, obvious include, a lot of these decks would play Ruinous Path, but I feel like in this specific deck, To the Slaughter is the superior choice, especially at instant speed. That's awesome. You can take out a Jutai swinging in. People play Clip Wings in the board just to do that. We can do it in the main, although we are playing Clip Wings in the board. But of course, we sort of have to play To the Slaughter, and it started off as 3 copies, but sort of quickly realized that I didn't really want 3 copies in the deck. 2 is pretty fine, no problem with that. And it does help out against Planeswalkers. Obviously, when we have Delirium, it's a 2-for-1 against a lot of the decks in the format. A lot of Planeswalkers being played right now. And to finish off the main deck, a weird inclusion, but one that I don't think I'd change. 2 copies of Pulse of Marassa in the deck. And, I want to play like Ultimate Price in the deck, and I feel like maybe if your meta is heavier on creatures than it is on control and planeswalkers and collected company and stuff, if people are playing a bunch of mono white or something, then maybe you can play Ultimate Price instead of Duress. But I feel like this slot is also kind of flexible. But I do like this card because against aggro decks, which against what we suffer against, this is 6 life. And anything that we've dumped into our graveyard that we didn't necessarily want to send to the graveyard, we can get back. If we somehow dump the 1 copy of Gitrog Monster in the graveyard, Pulse of Marassa can get it back. If they kill a Mind Rack Demon, Pulse of Marassa can get it back, Lands that go to the graveyard for whatever reason, the million reasons they go to the graveyard, including Gitrog Monster, Pulse can get them back. So I just really, really like Pulse. As again, it's a sort of safety valve in a different way, Something that goes to the graveyard that we normally be like, oh, I don't want that there. Like, we can just get it back and gain a bunch of lives. Pulse has been good for me, and I could see maybe just a 1 copy, but I've liked it so much that I've bumped it up to 2. 24 lands in the deck, and this is where I've had to fudge a little bit to get the budget down to 75. If you wanted to play, 4 of Waste, 4 of Hissing Quagmire, and maybe even a couple of more Drownyard Temples, because they are really important in this deck, then it would cost you anywhere, up to maybe $100 total price for the main deck. But this mana base is pretty good. I actually like Foul Orchard, to be honest with you. Evolving Wilds is obviously good. Fueling Delirium, that's awesome. Hissing Quagmire is really good in the deck. I would put a 4 of in there if you had the dollars for that. Just take out Foul Orchard, put in a Quagmire, That gives us a bunch of stuff with Death Touch. It can help us go up the ground really, really well in this deck. And they don't want to trade their creature with a land. They don't want to have to do that. But I want to bring it back around to Drownyard Temple before I finish the lands, actually. If you have a couple of bucks, definitely drop another copy or 2 of this in there, and there could even be 4. Really, really good with the Gitrog Monster. Sacrifice it to the monster, put it right back into play after you draw your card. Not a big deal. Also good considering we're dropping a bunch of cards into the graveyard. If we drop Drownyard Temples in, just put them back into play. Here's our sideboard here. We're mostly protecting against aggro in the board. We've got like 6 different removal pieces. Ultimate Price, super good, and I've already mentioned could be in the main deck. But we've also got, the filling out of the playset of Duress there, and we've got Transgress the Mind. Against the more control-y decks that play Planeswalkers, Ramp even, for instance, a lot of different decks that want to go pretty high up on us, and Transgress can get rid of all those Ulamogs and Seasons Past and Chandra Flamecallers and all that. So Transgress, especially, I could also see being in the main deck. Aside from that, Virulent Plague is an awesome card in the current meta. This all but wipes out green-white tokens in and of itself. So Virulent Plague is a really, really good budget piece for, those players that don't have a whole lot of money, but they want to beat the biggest decks in the format, because this is good against any hangerback walkers. It's good against Naya tokens, Planeswalkers, whatever you call it. It's good against green-white tokens. It's good against Kalitas. He can't make zombie tokens, basically, if you have a Virulent Plague out. So just no Secure the Wastes, so Westvale Abbey's harder to activate. So Virulent Plague is an all-star sideboard card right now. Before we move on to the power rankings, I'm just going to talk about a couple of cards that if you had a little bit, more money, you could play in the deck. Starting with Sylvan Advocate. A lot of people like playing Sylvan Advocate in the format right now. And we have access to green. We've got, we're going pretty long in the deck. We're going to have our 6 lands out. We're playing Hissing Quagmires too. So I really like the idea of Sylvan Advocate. I just didn't have the money flexibility in the deck for him. Same thing with Kalitas, Kalitas is just an extremely solid creature that would work with all the removal that we're playing. And it's just, Kalitas. Kalitas is ridiculous, and he should probably go in the deck, considering the deck has black in it. And just Kalitas is really good against the Aristocrats builds that are seeing play right now. 4-color right, he's good against that too. So just, Kalitas goes in decks with black, and I could see him going in this. And lastly, as far as upgrades, I'm sure there's more upgrades here, but I feel like Tireless Tracker could do some work in the deck for you. A lot of lands coming into play, and especially if you're playing the Drownyard Temples, he could be pretty good in the deck. So, Evolving Wilds is in the deck. I just think Tireless Tracker is a pretty darn good card. He would also give us a little bit more flexibility with things like Traverse the Ubenwald or Vessel of Nascency. Maybe sometimes we'd want to pick a land from those cards if we had a tracker in play. So I like sort of the dimension that he brings to the deck. I like that he's a card drawing engine. That's not bad either. So, and he can win the game for us by getting big. So I could see Tireless Tracker putting in work. Here are your power rankings. A final score of 63. Not bad for a deck that's going to cost you about 75 bucks. Not a bad score at all. And a couple of these I should point out. I feel like some of these stats are right on the cusp, Like the power 6, that could almost be a 7. It just barely grazes 7 but doesn't quite get there. Same thing with defense, We're playing a few defensive pieces in the deck, and we've got a bunch of Death Touch things, so I think we sort of almost get to 7, but not quite. It's like 6.8. in both of those categories. So the deck is actually possibly a little bit better even than its score here, and especially when it comes together. You know, not the highest consistency ever, but when it does come together, it's a thing of beauty, and it's a very synergistic deck. But it doesn't have to be. You know, things like Mind Rack Demon are good pieces in and of themselves. Gitrog Monster, good standalone piece as well. So, you know, a few of these Hangerback Walker, good standalone piece. You know, there are games you can win by playing a Hangerback Walker, letting him die, getting your tokens, and then just getting him back out of the graveyard later with the Pulse of Mirasa and playing a huge Hangerback Walker. And you get a 4/4 Hangerback Walker late game. If they bust it, they have to deal with that. So a lot of different avenues to victory here, at least more than there appears to be. So the deck doesn't need to fire on all cylinders to win or anything, but when it does fire on all cylinders, it's a thing of beauty, and it's fun to watch, and it's fun to play too. And we've just got a lot of different things once we have Delirium that are pretty threatening. That old, you know, 3rd turn Autumnal Gloom and 4th turn Mind Rack Demon, that's nothing to sneeze at. That is actually really, really threatening. So give the deck a try. I know that there's a lot of people that love dumping stuff in their graveyard in order to make stuff happen. That's a pretty high percentage of the Magic community. So give this deck a try. I think that you'll like it. And if you have any like suggestions for tweaks or anything, as usual, let me know down there in the comments. And let me know what you want to see next. You know, I've got the green triple tech coming up pretty soon. A triple deck for mono green. Also got to do a mono black deck. That's the only other one I haven't done. I'm thinking mono black sacrifice, but I'm also thinking big black, which I know invites so many jokes. But you know, we see big red, which is a bunch of removal and like huge guys. I think we can do that in black too. So black sacrifice or big black, which is just, I know this is the internet and I shouldn't name the deck big black. That's all I've got for now, out of time for the time being. So I'll see you guys next time. If you enjoyed the content, do me the solids, like, share, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. It actually helps out like incredibly. I don't even want you to do anything else for me. Just hit the like button and then do a couple of things. And I'll see you guys next time. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.